And now we delve into our next topic, navigating board shareholder engagement strategies for building trust and aligning interests. How do we ensure boards and shareholders are on the same page? And can I please call upon our speakers to discuss further? Elizabeth Cooper, founder and CEO of We Are Ludo Limited. Susan Al-Ghanam, Section Head Organizational Resilience and Business Continuity at Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome back. Again, for some of those of you who know me, and for those of you who don't know me, just introduce myself again. My name is Suzanne Ghanem. I work in the Environment Agency of Abu Dhabi for the past 13 years and going to 14th year, inshallah. And I do have an overall of 15 years of experience in the industry, like in the UAE in general. And definitely I'm here during the conference and after the conference if anyone wants to reach out to me. Also, Elizabeth, if you can like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. So pleased and grateful to be here today. I am Elizabeth Cowper. I've had a career of 25 years in HR, during which time I've coached and managed and guided boards into top performance, not just for individuals, but for the company themselves. I now run my own company called Ludo, and we work with companies to drive cultures of inclusion and well-being. And I run an online community called the Ludo Collective, which I invite any of you to be part of, which is really supporting HR, DEI, and leaders to get the best performance from themselves and the company. So that's me. Thank you, Susan.
Well said, Elizabeth. Nice to finally meet you in person. So let's get down to business to try to inspire, our audience today. So basically our theme is navigating board stakeholder engagement strategies in order to build trust and align their key interests. So Elizabeth, in your opinion, what are the type of tools that we need to actually utilize, in order to engage with the board members? Like, in your opinion, if you can just share with us from your experience of dealing with the board.
Yeah, of course. So bringing a board together is clearly critical to driving the strategy of an organization, and how we communicate with the board holders, the board members within themselves, but also the external shareholders. That's kind of two different parts, I guess. I'm going to pick off the first bit around the actual board themselves and how they need to best communicate. Transparency is everything here. So creating spaces where each and every person at that board table has a view is really, really important. And it might sound obvious, but it's important for each board member to really pay attention to how each person is showing up in that board meeting. Are we hearing from each and every person? Is everybody having a voice? Are all of those people contributing and bringing their expertise? When you're working on a board, all those people are key experts in that area, and that diversity of thought and opinion is really massive for how we all communicate together. That's the verbal communication in the room. But outside of that boardroom, creating safe spaces, and I think we're going to talk about safe spaces shortly, we'll come back to that, but creating safe spaces for communication outside of the actual room, there are ways in which you can do that too. And then when we talk about communicating with external shareholders have put money into your business. These are people typically that have a vested interest literally in your company. They want to know what's going on. And in this, one of the key things that I think we can get very wrong is the cadence of communication. What I mean by that is that if you're giving a shareholder update and you send one and then not for 6 months and then one a week later, it's very confusing. Shareholders want regular communication on a cadence so they know exactly what and when to expect. And even the minutiae of the document itself that provides that investor shareholder update needs to be in the same order. So you know it's, for example, a summary first, and then it's the numbers, and then it's where are we on the strategy, it's the KPIs, the OKRs, so that if you regularly receive that document on a, let's say, monthly basis, you know exactly where to look first if there's a particular part of that that interests you and you require information on. Those shareholders also need to know they can approach you at any time to get information when they need it. So creating accessibility in communication, where if they want to pick up the phone and ask a question, there is somebody readily available to help give that information. So these are some of the ways in which we can really keep that communication open.
Wonderful, well said. And I just want to add, like, especially when it comes to board members, board member committee members are not only limited to private companies. This is also, it's branched out, it's applicable to government entities, local companies, across many, like companies, like, I believe, depending on the size of the organization and the stakeholders who actually, like you mentioned, have invested, into the business itself. And so basically here, let's go dive into creating, you've mentioned about creating that safe space. Does that safe space include, aside from transparency, sharing the information, how much information can be shared between the board members and the shareholders, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'm just going to take the first part on creating a safe space. I think we should dive into that a little bit more. That safe space in the boardroom, and I like that you picked up on private versus public companies. There are boards in private companies, they may not have external shareholders, but they will have stakeholders. So many of these things we're talking about today will transcend across both types of those companies. But this safe space piece is huge. I said I have a background in HR, so psychological safety and belonging and how we drive that culture in companies has been a huge part of my career. And the safe space piece is what fundamentally sits under all of that. It underpins all of it. Unless people can feel safe to be in true, full expression of self, they will not perform to their best. And a lot of the work we do at Ludo is around this. It's the intersection of inclusion and well-being and how they come together. So when we translate that into, board and shareholder engagement, each and every member of that board must feel a sense of belonging and psychological safety to be in full expression. And for that board to perform at their optimum and drive that strategy to success, it is so important that each person can feel they can step forward and share what they need to share. And that safe space comes through inviting each member to speak, ensuring those people can have a voice and can take actionable steps to fulfill their mission in the role that they do. And so that individual mission is as important as the collective group of the board and how they work together. And I have seen it in organizations where somebody might be shut down or pushed back or spoken to in a way that shuts them down, and then we've instantly lost that gem of knowledge that person could have shared with that group, which can be really demotivating and demoralizing for the board. So that's a key part. And I invite anyone in this room who sits on a board and notices there's someone in the room who potentially isn't speaking to turn around and say, give me your thoughts, and just really invite that safe space for everyone to show up in their best self.
And mostly, like in these board meetings, normally you need to have, a moderator, kind of like a moderator who's completely neutral to make sure that these meetings are being monitored and to avoid, any toxic, the toxic environment themselves, if that was actually identified during the meeting, so they don't have to jump out of the main points of the conversation or the agenda itself, because board meetings today are more focused on, strategic visions, of the organizations, and as well as the vision of, depending on the countries, for example, in the United Arab Emirates, we do have the board of directors, you know, their highnesses, who are actually the board of directors in the UAE in general. And then for every organization, every organization has its own board members, or what we call top management members, where basically that they need to align that kind of vision, you know, of the country, and then escalating down to be able to achieve, you know, their main scope and the agenda according to the vision's country. So, Elizabeth, in your opinion, to be part of this board member, is there a recruitment criteria or requirement or process in order for, you know, any personnel wants to join, you know, the board member himself or the shareholder?
Absolutely. Recruiting for a board member is one of the most costly processes you might undertake in a business, and the cost of getting it wrong is really enormous. There's a kind of a stat which has got detailed stat behind it, but typically it's 1.5 to 2 times a person's salary when you churn talent in a business. So you can imagine a board member salary, you get that wrong, it's a huge cost to the business financially, but also for a public business, it doesn't look great, you know, when you hire someone and then they leave shortly afterwards. So there are many reasons why it is worth really committed investment in getting this right. So when you recruit a board member, before you even get into the process of recruitment, the board, and I would absolutely invite shareholders to be part of this discussion, is to talk about where there may be an expertise gap in that board. So what does this board need to truly perform at its best? And potentially you're looking for a financial expert, let's say, on that board, and maybe you've had the financial expert leave. So you might think you're recruiting for a like-for-like replacement. You're not. Look at what was missing in the outgoing person and discuss and analyze and make sure that's very clear on what you look for when you go out to market to recruit that new board member. And that really, really matters. So get that right. Then, depending on how you recruit that person, it could be a search firm, for example, but identify your partner and really do your DD. Get your due diligence right on that partner that's going to help you recruit for that person, because you can lose valuable time in going down a recruitment process where typically in a search firm you've already paid a third up front, and then find that isn't the right partner for you. So that's also really important. Get each member of the board to meet this candidate when you're ready to take them to the next stage. So it's the pre-selection, then the next stage, and ask shareholders to meet them. At this stage, if there is multiple people in the interview process, this is completely normal. It's absolutely right, and you want the diversity of opinion, feedback, questioning to really dive deep on whether this is the right person to join your board. There are other ways in which you can look at the right culture, team, and personality fit around values. So whether it's psychometric testing, strengths finder reports, there's many tools out there. Identify one that's right for your business, and then use that as a tool to finalize your decision-making process. You don't ever lead with that, but it comes later down the line to help you identify that you're recruiting the right person. And I just want to add here the real importance of diversity on boards. And this is a topic that's more important than ever. But we know, there's a report by McKinsey, that boards who have more diversity are 15% more profitable. So not just is it good for business, but it's good for bringing in diversity of thought, ideas, values, leadership, and different ways of bringing things to the table. Now, we all have bias. Everyone in this room carries bias. It's innately in each one of us, from our values, our upbringing, who we are. We all have it. And catching yourself in that moment when you want to recruit somebody who feels like you unconsciously in the room, and you might connect with them because they're like you, that's your moment to ask yourself, is this the right candidate? Or actually, do I need somebody who challenges me, stretches me, and who can bring a diversity of thinking to the boardroom? And it's really, really critical that we consider that diversity lens, which brings far more creative thinking to the boardroom.
Wonderful. So that's basically the process of the recruitment. Is there a process in case if basically one or a few of the members of the board steps down or is voted out? What would be that process itself? Is there like a backup plan in terms of replacing, or God forbid something happened to one of the members where basically the member, that specific member, was not able to be present to share his or her vision or knowledge or ideas during the meeting itself? Is there a process for that?
That's a great question, and I can think about a real example where this happened. And I think it depends how it happens. And what I mean by that is that there may be an incident where you know this person's exiting and you have time to prepare. That's your best case scenario. But it can also happen incredibly suddenly. And I've experienced this in a business where I was in, where there was actually a misconduct related issue. I won't name the business or the person, of course, for confidentiality. But that person had to exit relatively quickly. And in that process, we had probably a matter of hours to think about the communication. And if you are a public company, this is even more difficult to manage. So from that moment, if that's a short-term crisis, it's crisis talks immediately. You bring everybody in who needs to be involved, and you talk about the press release and how this will be managed in the press for a public business. And the reputation management of that business in that moment needs to be managed in the right way. And we all know that many of the things you might read in the press about an exiting board member may not give the whole truth, because there is spin involved, of course. But it's about managing it for both parties to ensure we protect the business and the individual in the right way. But that depends on the exit reason, of course. And during those crisis talks, you will talk about responsibility, who owns what. You're into business continuity discussion at that point. And there should be, anyway, for a public board, a business continuity plan, which would have been in place before. Any public board needs that if they have external shareholders. For a private business, it's a little bit more simple, because you don't have such stringent frameworks in place and risk management processes that need to be there. But either way, immediate crisis chats, getting your comms right, and then considering the comms internally and externally. And they will be worded slightly differently. And that's deliberate, to manage your employees in the company for their own safety in that business and their sense of belonging, also for external people if it's a public business.
So basically, my next question to you is, how do we align these strategic interests of the board members, and link it to the organizational vision, mission, and vision? If I would love to hear your ideas, and you can share your knowledge, in terms of what are the way of communications between the board of members, towards the organization, like from top, bottom, and bottom up.
In terms of how they're all aligned to drive the strategy and mission, yeah, of course. So if we talk about the board, there needs to be KPIs, OKRs, milestones in place that you're focusing on. And with any strategy, it may be 3 to 5 years out, but we know you manage that in chunks. So it'd be, what are we doing the next 3 months, the next 6 months? And having those in place and constantly reviewing that we're on track to achieve the strategy for the board is really important, and will form part of that comms document that we talked about at the beginning, of how you then communicate within that board and to your external shareholders. But keeping the board on track and aligned to that mission, whether there is a vesting schedule for shares, or there are specific bonuses linked directly to company and individual performance, these are ways to align that board to not just financially incentivize them, but have people truly engaged with what they're achieving for that business. Those are much more measurable when it comes to financial metrics, but there are behaviors within that organization that I encourage any board and team to look at. How does that leader cascade to their own specialist division? How does that leader behave in the business to lead and bring the company on the journey? So there are some sort of, you've got quantitative and qualitative assessments here, But if those metrics are reviewed regularly in that board cadence, we know we're on track. You know, we're keeping the mission and the vision alive of where we're going.
Wonderful. I have a last question. It's actually a two-part question. Do you feel like these board meetings are effective, and how can we make them effective?
I love this question. I think it's easy to show up in the boardroom, sit down, have your board meeting and leave. That is the weeniest part of strategically planning really strong board meetings. Before every board meeting, there must be an agenda. And that agenda can't be sent 20 minutes before the meeting starts. It needs to be sent out at least, in my view, 5 days before the meeting to allow people to prepare for their individual part of that board meeting. If there's reading material, maybe a paper has been released that's relevant to your industry sector, send it in advance so each board member can then read that paper and prepare and be ready. Within that agenda, having broken down time slots, like we have for today at the conference, of the time zone for each section of that board meeting allows you to keep on track and not just cover 2 points and realize you've missed, the rest of the meeting. And then you touched on this earlier, but having a chair or somebody in the room who can not just minute take, but document actions, take down those minutes, make notes of things that come up, identify who is taking which action and on which time scale. So it's all well saying this person does this, by when? Let's really have accountability for each person in that boardroom. So these are all critical frameworks of having a really strong board meeting. Aligning when the next meeting is, when the communication will be sent when we talked about the regular cadence to the shareholders, but also internally. If you are a private business and you're having regular board meetings, do we communicate to the wider business in town halls or in stand-ups or in team meetings? What's the output? And this is a really important point that can be easily missed. If you imagine you're one of the employees in a company and that board sits in a room once a month, you might be thinking, what are they talking about? What's going on in this business? Is my role safe? Where are we going? Are we on track? So that internal communication piece that falls out of a board meeting is also really important. And having effective stakeholder management, risk management, there's a stat by Deloitte that says that boards with effective risk management and shareholder management have 50% higher returns. So again, there's a cost to getting this right.
Wonderful. I kind of feel like I do have one more question. Do you feel like it can be challenging for the board members to meet the expectations, of the agenda that's being presented to them?
Yeah, I do. And I also think it depends on the personality. And of course, as we said, we want diversity on boards. You're going to have introverts, extroverts. You're going to have people who are perfectionists, and you're going to have people that go with the flow, and all of those dynamics are in the room. And we want all those dynamics in the room, by the way, because those different ways of working and thinking is what helps us all grow to be better people. So where you've got an introvert who might be, let's take the scenario of an introvert who's a really detail-orientated and dives in the minutiae, they might feel quite anxious in that room of, but we haven't covered this and we didn't go deep on that. How do we bring that out? So I think the individual personalities of that board is sometimes what's challenging for them all to feel safe and connected in that room.
So basically you have a bit of alpha in these board meetings and other personalities. That definitely can be challenging. Well, we basically have, we only have 6.5 minutes, so we basically leave, an opportunity for the audience to ask any questions to myself or to Elizabeth, related to the theme of today's discussion. So, any questions? We hope we didn't bore anyone to death. We have a question.
Just a quick question. What are your thoughts on the CEO of the company himself or herself being a part of the board, because it does happen in a lot of cases. And personally, I feel sometimes it may skew the agenda at times if the CEO himself or herself is a part of the board. So what's your take? Is this a good practice to have the CEO on the board, or perhaps not a very good practice? Thank you.
So just to clarify the question, so I make sure I answer it, so the question is about having the CEO on the board and what my views are about that.
Right, correct.
Yes, I think again, it's interesting and depends on the private or public business scenario. It's actually really valuable that you've brought this up, because we should have maybe clarified this at the beginning. You know, a board can be different things. So you can have an advisory board, let's say, on a big public company where some of them might be NEDs, they might not be part of that business, but they're still on the board. And then you might have a board which is the board that leads the company, and that can be in a public or a private business. And then you might have the advisory board that sits alongside that board that runs the company. Sorry if I'm talking in riddles. So in answer to the CEO being on the board, 100% the CEO must be on the board. And that's on the board that runs the company. Because those decision-making processes that are formulated in that room, that CEO is the leader, the driver, the initiator, the power at the top of that business to bring all those voices together. And that would be typically a more private business. And then in a public business, you will have the same thing, but you may also have additional board members who are in an advisory capacity, and maybe they meet on a specialist area, and the CEO might not sit in that room, but there should be a rolled up cadence of communication to that CEO. So I think where it's a board that runs the company, 100% yes, the CEO should be in the room.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions?
Elizabeth, I thought that statistic about having 15% of boards that have 15%, I beg your pardon, boards with diversity have a 15% higher success rate than those that aren't. I'm curious, the term diversity can be interpreted in so many different ways. And quite often, we've seen examples of companies embracing diversity for the sake of embracing diversity or for that sake of that headline. How and where do you feel leaders can actually make that clear distinction between actually embracing and bringing in diversity for the good of the board and for the business versus putting a diverse individual in there because it provides good optics? What are the thoughts around that?
It's a really good question, and a lot of the work we do at Ludo is around this space. Controversial. I don't believe in quotas. I don't think it's the right way to run a business. And if you are adding a diverse employee or an employee from a marginalized group to your board to tick a box, it's completely the wrong reason to be doing it. And that might shock some people to say that, but I'm going to tell it how it is. For me, you can create diversity on boards through bringing in diverse knowledge, talent, and that may be somebody from a marginalized group. There are ways in which you can do that. There are great systems. There's one called Applied that we partner with at Ludo, where they remove education, name, and age from CVs. So you're looking at CV only on the experience of that candidate. And the statistics that sit behind it will blow your mind in terms of how much more diversity comes into a business when you remove name, age, and education. So being mindful of our bias in that process is massive. And where we are going down the route of positively trying to create a diverse board through a quota, for example, if we're going down that route and we're adding our own bias to it, we will typically make decisions that aren't actually necessarily going to be right for the business. So removing barriers to entry for people who might otherwise have been discounted is really important. When you dive into that stat from McKinsey, we know that boards that have 30% women perform better, for example. So there are some places where we need to begin at the bottom of the organization to create rungs of leadership as those businesses grow up to reach the top. So creating diversity on boards can be created from inside the company and from recruiting outside by removing, where possible, the lens of bias to create diversity of thought. Does that answer the question? So, yeah, thank you.
Just to add to what you said, sometimes, like, having these board meetings, the environments are completely different than what we are actually used to in each of our organizations. We do have, like, meeting with the top management on an operation level, on a strategic level. So the higher you go in these committees and committees and committees, the board meetings are, if you agree with me, are completely cutthroat. There is no room for sensitivity. It's basically trying to address the issues that requires to be resolved. And it's taken on a really, really serious note. Sometimes these board meetings might last like half a day, depending on the agenda itself that needs to be addressed. So, basically, again, there's no room for, like, to think about or to put, it's always putting your feelings aside, just to ensure and focus on the reputation of the organization. I think that's practically it. And
can I jump in there on one point on that? Sorry. I know it says time's up, but this is really important.
Yes.
I invite you all, I won't go into it now, just to Google heart-led leadership. I want to bring emotion back into the boardroom, because you're right, it's an emotionless space, and I deeply believe we need to bring heart-led leadership back. I'll leave it at that.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Time's up. Thank you guys for listening to us, and we are here. During the conference, you can reach out to us. If we're not physically here, you can still reach out to us through LinkedIn. Thank you so much.